Hello and welcome back to Reptiles and Research. So in today's video we're joined by Thomas Griffiths. He's here to give us an absolute masterclass on reptile vision, talking about why LEDs aren't actually white to a reptile's vision and what actually is needed to make it true reptile white vision. Also we're going to cover the UVB ban that's coming along very quickly, the state of the industry in general in terms of the technology. We'll go into why LED UV is important and it's a must and we must have it, the problems it faces, and the current situation with T5s essentially going extinct. All of that and more are contained within this absolute masterclass from Thomas. So watch the whole thing through. It's very, very, very detailed. Without further ado, Thomas. Welcome back to the podcast, Tom. Everyone appreciated you coming on last time, as well as you going on our sister podcast, Animals at Home. Everyone appreciated you sharing your knowledge. So now, today, we're going to get some even more of that, and we're going to talk about LEDs.
I think this spawned from, I posted some little rants. I think you mentioned the rants about the concept of full spectrum and the concept of LEDs. My camera keeps like blurring. I don't know if you can see that. I'm just gonna see if that fixes the problem. It keeps trying to readjust.
It was hunting, yeah.
We spoke about the concept of LEDs, and since last chatting to you in any official capacity, I've certainly seen a massive influx in people wanting LEDs. My inbox has exploded with people sending me pictures of LEDs saying, are these ones any good? Pictures of all sorts of products from amazing to terrible. And then also on top of that, we've got some new LEDs coming out that I've been working with some brands with. And I think LEDs are becoming more and more popular, which is a really good thing. But I did want to, my rant essentially was about touching on the fact that they're not as perfect as people think they are. And I don't want people to think I'm telling them to not get LEDs, because they should get LEDs. But I think what's the word? I think people need to exercise caution with what they're buying and why they're buying. And what little bits of advice that people are giving on certain things. And I've got a little presentation that I've kind of amalgamated from different presentations together to kind of show a few things, which I'm happy to show you. Again, I'm not gonna. Sorry about that.
It'll be fine. When you share your screen, we'll be like tiny.
I can show my screen. That's that. I've been up to some little things like that. I've been doing lots of testing recently. Lots of talks at zoos. Literally, I had a little bit of time off. And it was all spent down in London doing things, and then it's back to the grind. So you've caught me at a fun time, because I'm currently waiting on some bulbs to just burn in. So I've got a little bit of time to sit and chat.
Yeah, I've seen your grind. I've seen the amalgamation of bulbs at your place.
Yes, you did come. Yes, actually, yes. Since then, you've come around, haven't you?
Yeah, I've seen the Masterclass.
You've seen that was so the testing facility.
It's in the lab.
The lab was currently I was rejigging it as just before you came, and then a company got in touch and must have sent me 50 bulbs. Loads of bulbs. And I had to kind of throw together a quick, because I basically decided that I wouldn't do any testing for about a month whilst I rejigged the whole room. That didn't go to plan, because then I had a load of bulbs show up. So I had to kind of start bulbs burning in on random bits of the wall and things like that, which is all fine. It's all easy peasy. It's a heck. I've got a lot of light bulbs. Yeah. So
you thought you weren't going to be testing? No.
But yeah, I didn't think I would be testing for a good old week. Or no, I thought I'll give myself 2 or 3 weeks off, maybe a month off of testing, so that I can do stuff and that. That didn't go to plan now.
Yeah, absolutely not.
These things happen.
Yeah, so when it comes to like LEDs, right, what are the sort of advice that you've seen people giving out that have made you been like, ooh?
So to caveat this with, I think people giving good advice is really good, and I think it's really good that people are willing to share and share their knowledge. But it's the thing that really got me. The thing that really got me was noticing the amount of people mentioning full spectrum. And about a couple of weeks ago, I launched a mini sort of questionnaire poll thing on the internet, which is still not finished at the time of recording this. I'm probably going to go for about another month or two. And in that, there were some questions, and that was kind of headed with, this isn't a test. It's not about a test of your knowledge. None of your personal data will be recorded, all this sort of thing. It's more just an idea of what people know and what people think they know, so that we have an idea of the knowledge base, because there's no point in us showing people these extreme graphs or charts and pictures of spectrum shifting over time and all this sort of stuff when the people can't read that in the first place, right? So we need, and they don't know what they're looking at. So I thought, right, we need to decide what level people are at on average and go from there. So I launched this little thing. And some of the questions I've posted some of the questions I'll show you in a moment. One of the questions we asked was words to the effect of, what do you consider full spectrum? And I keep seeing these words full spectrum written a lot. And I think they're misused a lot. Now, I don't think that's anyone's fault. I think that is the fact that it's not really an agreed term by anyone. And I wrote in my little thing that I think people don't use it correctly because they don't know. And we can't know something unless there's a definition. So I came up with some mini definitions, but I'm still not 100% sure on my own definitions. But I could show you if you want. I can show you some of the things that,
because my definition of what I thought full spectrum meant was like 400 to like the 750, 800 or whatever it is. That's like all the visible light fully represented across the nanometers, and like we've got a nice spread going.
yeah.
But I've also seen people use it as it being like, you've got your UV bulb, then you've got like a LED for the visible spectrum, and then like you've got like a halogen, and I think it means like representing like across like all three different types of like.
Yeah, so as humans we like to categorize things, and we've broadly categorized light as a concept into three main things. We've categorized it into visible light, which is the stuff we see, which, as you say, is about 400 to around 700 nanometers, we call it. And that's the visible range. We have the UV range, the ultraviolet range, and then we have the infrared range. There are three main categories, but of course they're subcategorized, right? So you've got visible light is categorized down into the colors of the rainbow. We've got UV is categorized down into UVB and UVA. UVA is categorized down into UVA 1 and 2. There's like these we really like to subcategorize things, which is fine. But what we forget with doing that is we lose sight of the bigger picture, which is that actually it's all one spectrum, and it flows between them. There isn't a hard line in nature between UVA and visible light. There isn't one. The biological processes don't stop at 400 nanometers and then a new biological process. Everything kind of flows in one spectrum. That's what it is.
Nature, man.
yeah. It's very hippie. The hippies were right all along. And it's interesting that people categorize things like that, and I think it's those categories that is what people are saying of full spectrum. So, like you say, people say full spectrum for LEDs, and probably what they're referring to is the fact that it produces the visible light spectrum. But then, even arguably, it doesn't even do that, which I can show you in a minute. A UVB lamp. Shall I share my screen? I can show you what I've.
Go for it.
Let me look at this. So yeah, that's one of the things that started off. The other thing that started it off was the amount of times I see in, say, bearded dragon groups that, of course, I'm a part of because I have a bearded dragon, is this concept of not using colored bulbs, right? And I can see why we don't want to use colored bulbs, because they're not natural, right? Light isn't ever bright green or bright blue or bright red on its own. But I see a lot of people saying colored lights will like hurt your animal. And I've done some digging. I can't find any evidence of colored light doing any damage to an eye. But you see like, no colored bulbs, no heat mats, don't use colored light, it'll damage their eyes, all this sort of stuff. And I want to present, I think that's fine. I think people are a bit misguided on why colored lights aren't great. I think people have gone down this weird dangerous route when it's not really the danger of them that's the problem. But I just want to imply a little bit of irony that we're saying don't use colored lights, but then we're using colored lights without realizing it. So this is the one of the questions that we asked was, what is full spectrum? And you can see some of the answers. The vast majority of people said that full spectrum is sunlight replication. Now, the way it's presented is there's different possible answers they can tick, or there's other, and they can fill out their own. But the way it's also presented is those answers will mix up each time somebody refreshes the page, so that we're not forcing one answer on them. So those answers are always mixed up. The vast majority of people said sunlight replication. And then after that, combo of a UV lamp, LED, and a heat lamp is what people said. Some people said not sure, and I've put that in the other category because there was so many just people saying random stuff. But you can see that pretty much most people have said sunlight replication or some sort of combination of heat lamp, UV, and LED, which is, I suppose, not necessarily wrong, but that's what people consider full spectrum. What do you think about that?
I think I've seen that a lot. I think I've seen a lot of people. Like I said, I think a lot. Well, I said the yellow, didn't I? I said I think people think it's like LED, your heat lamp, and then your UV, because you're like trying to represent each little chunk the way labeling.
No, go on.
I've also seen that been synonymous with saying sunlight replication as well. So it's almost the same answer.
Yeah, this was one of the caveats before all these questions. You're reminded sometimes there isn't a right or wrong answer. It's more just about what people answer than the right or wrong, right? Because technically any of these could be correct, I suppose, in certain circumstances. So it's not about being right or wrong. It's more just about what people consider the right answer, or what the average is. So again, people were told that when doing the questionnaire. There isn't a right or wrong answer. It's just about what you think.
Is there a dictionary definition of full spectrum?
I gave two definitions in my little write-up rants. One of them was the true full spectrum, which is the spectrum that we receive on Earth, the terrestrial spectrum, ranging from the UV range all the way up to the far infrared stuff, the very depths of infrared that we receive on Earth from the sun. And that is the natural true full spectrum. And then the other one, I think I referred to it as biologically specific full spectrum, which is if a UVB lamp says it's full spectrum, then it should say it's biologically specific full spectrum, which means that it provides UVB in natural proportions. So it's the rest of the stuff it gives off isn't full spectrum, just the UVB bit, and that would be biologically specific or biologically appropriate full spectrum. Same for a plant growth lamp. A plant growth lamp you could say is full spectrum if it follows the plant growth curves, the McCree curves, what we call. Again, that's my own version. I've not really they're certainly not the definitions. They're just the ones I use, the ones I've kind of proposed, if you like. Of course, the brands are all different, and of course, here's some examples. Right, there's an example from Arcadia for the Jungle Dawn LED bar that says just pure full spectrum energy. That's an LED. Then we've got ZoomEd, who talk about the Reptile 10.0 bulb, the fluorescent. That says full spectrum in it as well. And then you've got this company called NeoRep, which is a company based in the UK. They've got here a mercury vapor lamp, and they say full spectrum as well. Now, those are three different kinds of lamps, and I can show the actual spectra in a minute. No way are all of those full spectrum, right? Because otherwise you only need one of them. Why would you need? Well, they all do different jobs, but they all use full spectrum in the marketing, which I think
so it's almost like they know that full spectrum terminology that consumers are using and wanting, because there's slap that on the box.
So yeah, I mean, this isn't an attack on any of the brands. This is just a fact, right? It's a fact that this is what they do. and you'll see this on plant growth lamps if you buy plants, lamps for plants at home, right? Even if you're nothing to do with reptiles. If you buy bird lamps, you'll see full spectrum written on the bird lamps. Full spectrum is just a marketing term at this point in time. It's not a technical scientific term. So when people say they want to buy a full spectrum lamp, they might have an idea of what they mean.
Yeah.
But I hypothesize that people don't. Then I kind of went down this route of UVA, and I asked the question, do you provide UVA? Again, no right or wrong answers. You're not going to be judged for what you give on your answer if you say yes or no and you're wrong, whatever. You can see the vast majority of people said yes, or not sure. And only 9% of people. So bear in mind, this is not unfinished. We've actually had about 10 or 12 more submissions since making this presentation. But generally these are about the right answers. Most people will say yes to that. And I asked myself why that would be. In fact, the next question on the questions was, tell us what do you mean when you say yes? And this is kind of a general rule of some of the answers that people gave.
Deep heat projector.
Heat projector being there is hilarious. But if that's what people think, then I'm not going to blame them for thinking that. It's us, whoever us is, for telling them, or potentially leading them down the route that could be a full spectrum lamp. But you can see things like halogens. Some people say things like UVA is just light, so any light is fine. Jungle Dawn LEDs, an all-in-one lamp. A few people said T5s or UVB lamps. It's really interesting to see.
UVA is heat.
UVA is heat, which is a fun one, isn't it? I think what they mean is UVA comes in heat lamps.
Yeah.
Which it doesn't. I'll come on to that in a minute. I think that's what people think UVB LED is on there. There's some pretty good. Oh, my door's going. There's Amazon's here, everyone. What have we ordered today? Some cat litter, it looks like. But I did want to touch on UVA, so I'll touch on what I talk about when I'm talking about UVA. But UVA has a whole host of biological uses. There's some really good studies on people who use like suntan beds, and these they measure endorphin levels before and after, and they find that endorphins are increased after exposure to UVA on a suntan bed. There's ideas of people preferring suntan beds that actually produce UVA, so they give them a blind study of an option between a UVA producing one and a non-UVA producing one. You can't actually tell by looking at them, but people prefer the one that produces UVA, so it does something biologically and mentally to people that makes them happy, makes them want to do it. We know that UVA is linked to nitrous oxide in the skin, so that basically helps the skin prepare for trauma in the form of the drying effects of light or the damaging effects of UVB. NO in the skin kind of protects, if you like, prepares the skin for protection. UVA increases the levels of NO in the skin, which is interesting. There's a lot of other things. The main thing I want to touch on is the vision side of it. So it does have a lot of this, but I do want to touch on the vision side of it because I think that's the most appropriate, because we're talking about coloured bulbs. So here is here's the Earth, and there's the atmosphere. There it is. Yeah. There's the atmosphere around it, and there's the sun. Obviously, this is not to scale. That's the sun is far away, right? The sun's actually loads bigger than that. And if we zoom in slightly, we can see here that the sun, if we were to take a measurement of the sun's light when it was directly above, and we could take a measurement and we would class that as the amount of atmosphere that the sun has had to go through as one air mass. We call that one air mass.
Right.
Most references that you will see will refer to something else, which is that the sun is at a slight angle, usually about 40 degrees. And we measure again the same point, but we measure again. We can see the light has passed through
more air mass.
It's passed through more. Yeah. So it's passed through about 1.5 air mass. So it's passed through a little bit more.
Right.
And now, obviously, as the sun goes down in the night sky, and obviously as the seasons change, so that the tilt of the Earth is different, 32.5 degrees. It's in proportion to the sun. It's different all year round. So the amount of air mass that the sun light has to go through changes constantly. But as an average, we say 1.5. That's an average sort of air mass for the sunlight, and that's what we use when we measure the sun as an average. We call it the ASTM standard, and it looks like this. So if we got that 1.5 air mass, we measure with a spectrometer, we'd get something like this. Now it goes off a lot more than this. I've focused here using this is a chart made by Dr. Serena Wunderlich, one of the smartest people in the world. She's allowed us to use these charts for these presentations. They're really good. But this is sort of a zoom in on the UV up until the start of infrared, basically. For the sake of this, we don't need to worry about the rest of the infrared spectrum. I could talk about why that is later on if you want. But if I label this part of the spectrum, so we've got UVB here, anything in this section is UVB, which is about 300, just under 300 to just under 320. We've got UVA2 in this section. And then those two together, we associate with vitamin D3 synthesis and regulation. So this is the important bit for vitamin D, right? We need both of those. We need UVB and UVA2 for safe vitamin D3 synthesis in the skin.
So UVB kickstarts the synthesis of the vitamin D, and then the UVA is actually the brakes for it and to stop.
Some people call it the brakes. Yeah, I've heard it called the brakes. Yeah, I prefer to call it regulation, but yeah, there's sort of UVB makes vitamin D go up, UVA2 makes vitamin D go down, but it's not going down is not the right term either. What it does, it regulates, right? It causes a host of different chemicals in the body. You've got lumistrol, testosterone, all these different chemicals in the skin to constantly kind of change molecular structure between each other. And what you end up with there is this equilibrium of chemicals in the skin that stop overproduction of vitamin D. Vitamin D being a fat-soluble vitamin that, in theory, you could overdose and you could end up with what's called hypervitaminosis D. We also have UVA1, which is those two together make UVA, but actually they have quite different biological areas. This is the extra color. This is also the area that all those studies I was talking about talk about. But I'm going to refer to it as the reptile vision, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. We've got visible light, which is the colors of the rainbow that we can see. And then we've got the start of infrared A, which is basking heat, if you like. And infrared A actually goes way off. You can see at the bottom, we've got what are called wavelengths. For the sake of this, somebody doesn't really need to know what that means, other than a different wavelength just means a different part of light. And across the side, on the y-axis, we've got the intensity. So we can see that the brightest or most intense part of the sun light is around this area, around the 480 nanometers, which is actually where the eye melanopsin in the eye is responsive to. So that's the chemical that's linked to things like endorphin release and waking up in the morning and all these sort of things. Is sort of, and if you look at that's actually sort of the color of sky is around 470, 480 nanometers. So it's this sort of this color that fills out the sky. That's the most voluminous part, if you like. Other things people should be aware of is that the shorter the wavelength, the more high energy the wavelength.
Don't you find it strange outside of reptiles that we don't light our own homes properly in a way that is
we don't
beneficial
like that at all. No, we don't like that. No, it's crazy.
Very strange.
And in fact, what we see is in the northern hemisphere, I was talking about the air mass changing. Oh, my hair, what's up with it? We're talking about the air mass changing over time throughout the year. And the UVB tends to cut off in the spectrum shifts slightly throughout the year. And in the wintertime, we don't really get much UVB here at all, partly because of that, and partly because we get more clouds. So there's more stuff blocking the sun. And we don't get the UVB. So what we end up with is completely cutting off that bottom end of the spectrum. And you see issues with people in the northern hemisphere all the time. You see people with low vitamin D. You see people with seasonal affective disorder, because we're not getting this light, and it's interesting to see. But that is essentially what I call the true full spectrum. Now, like I say, there is more over on the infrared side, but for the sake of what we're talking about today, which is the color aspect and the vision part of it, this is the full spectrum, the true full spectrum. And I've got a little back scratcher anyway. I'm gonna keep playing with that throughout the video. So I can make that into the. Sorry,
oh, sorry. Do you think it'd be more appropriate if brands would call something like, if they had an LED, they called it a full spectrum visible light, or visible light full spectrum, and then they were like, oh, actually no, because UVA, yeah.
I don't know. My initial response, my first answer is no, and because my first answer would be they should stop using the words full spectrum. But I know that now it is so ingrained into marketing that if you didn't have full spectrum on the box, people would be less likely to buy it because, well, that other one says full spectrum. So it's almost like it's too far now for this to be for us to fix the problem. I think I would prefer. What I would prefer is for brands to have on the box percentages of each band of light. So, for example, it would say UVB 0%, UVA 0%, and it would have percentages rather than ticks, because you see ticks and it doesn't actually tell you how much of the output is that. And it can say visible light 100%, so it's that it's 100% visible light. There's no UVB, no UVA, no infrared. That's what I would like to see is brands putting percentages on the boxes more appropriately, like they do with the T5s. Because from looking at a 12% T5 that 12% of it is UVB. The other problem is that it says like 30% or whatever UVA, but it doesn't tell you what part of UVA that is. It doesn't tell you if it's UVA 1 or the 2. There isn't a perfect way of doing it, and I don't have an answer. But it's a good question. So that's the sunlight, right? Now, here are what we've called the human cones. Now, the humans have in the back of the eyes 3 cone types. We have one that reacts to short wave that we call the blue cone, sometimes called the blue cone or S cone, S for short. We have the M cone, which is the medium wave or the green cone. And then we have the long cone or the L cone or the red. So we have red, green, and blue. We can see red, green, and blue. And light appears white if it activates or excites these cones in proportion to sunlight. Now, these aren't to scale for the sake of this. They're just visual aids so we can see where they are. And what I've tried to do is I've tried to put their peaks around where the sunlight peak is so that we can kind of see where they are.
Right, yeah.
So humans can see 3 colors, if you like. But what we know is that if we shine a red light, say up here around 650 nanometers, sorry, we know that it activates the red cone this much and activates the green cone this much. And thus the brain interprets that as a red color. If we have this color here, which is the 480 nanometers, all of the cones are activated at different amounts, and thus the brain interprets that as this is this blue color. So what we're seeing when we're seeing color is these cones being activated in different amounts. And what you're seeing with colorblind people is that those cones either haven't developed properly, or there's something wrong with those cones, the cones in the eyes, or the nerves, the electrical signals that come out of those cones. And they may not have access to one or more of those cells, so they can't see all of those colors. That's what color blindness basically is. But reptiles are different to this. Reptiles have the 4th cone. Now, I do want to put some caveats here before we continue, some disclaimers. And there's some studies there that people can refer to if they want. This sort of UVA cone that I'm putting on the screen is not species specific. It doesn't apply to any specific species. All species are different. So if an animal is nocturnal, then its UVA cone may be more sensitive or maybe slightly off what we see here. This is what we call an archetypal reptile. So if me and you could get together and design a reptile, we would probably give it this UVA cone. But they're all slightly different, right? So this is just a generic view of a reptile's cone. UVA cone, sorry. Those red, green, and blue cones that you see, they're still the human ones. We do have archetypal reptile cones there as well, but I've not put them on because that makes it too complicated. For the sake of this, we can use those as human cones, and that is the reptile cone. Is what we need. What I'm trying to get at here. The cone sensitivity is not to scale. In fact, if we were to make it to scale, the UVA cone would be about twice as sensitive to the blue, which would be about 75% more than the green and the red. So it actually goes down if we actually look at it. But what I've done is I've scaled them to match the sunlight as much as I can.
Right, okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Rather than, so those aren't actually to scale. So a reptile isn't less sensitive to UVA. And I think that's a really important caveat because I don't want people just assuming that for some reason reptiles are less sensitive to UVA. That's not the case. If anything, they're more sensitive to UVA.
So arguably it's the most important cone for them because it's there.
It's hard to say because we also have the melanopsin pigment in the eye which reacts to the 480 range. So someone could make an argument that that one's more important because that's what plays a role in circadian rhythms. So you could argue that one. You could argue that the red one is more important because they eat red flowers, so they could need to see the red, right? It's about all of them, right? So we're not, again, it's this whole spectrum thing, not.
But it's there, yeah.
I also want to make a caveat that I'm going to go through a few different spectra on the screen, and they're not all to scale with each other. What I mean by that is if we had lamp A at 30 centimeters away and measured it, it wouldn't be the same as the graph. And if we measured lamp B, it wouldn't be the same as the graph at 30 centimeters. What I'm saying is I've adjusted the scale of all the lamps to try and match. But if you were to actually use them in situ, they would be different brightness levels. So you can see that on the screen. Sometimes the brightness is 35,000 lux or words to that effect. Actually, what we find is that if you measure a lamp at 30 centimeters, it's more like 5,000 lux, right? I've upscaled a lot of them to make them the same. I think that's a really important caveat as well. And the final caveat is I ask anyone who watches this to please not screen grab, or if you are going to screen grab, at least link back to the video. And please, for the love of God, give credit to Serena for the graphs, because she made the graphs. I've put these little cone stuff over the top, but her software makes these graphs, so it's all for her.
Did she build the actual software?
Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Okay, Serena. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, she's very clever. Wow. Ridiculously clever. And she's got 3 kids or 2 kids, which is her. Like, I don't know how she manages all of this, and also being, having a full-time job and all this sort of crazy stuff. So, yeah, absolute. Please, for the love of God, give credit to her for this.
She German?
Pardon?
She German?
She is from Germany. Yeah.
Very efficient. Yeah.
Very efficient. So what I've seen, I saw on a Bearded Dragon group recently a screen grab from, I can't remember if it was our previous chat or the chat I had with Dylan, but it was a screen grab from that, and it was taken completely out of context. And I looked at it and thought, I recognize that picture. I recognize that face. It was my face. And I thought, oh God. And I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was completely out of context, basically. And I thought, I need to make sure I put a caveat anytime I do this in the future. So if something, I've pretty much put it at the top of every screen as well. If somebody has to take a screen grab, please give credit and link to this video, because without it, the context is completely gone and things could be taken massively out of context. Like these things where the fact that the cone sensitivity isn't to scale. Somebody could look at that graph on its own without the context and think, oh, cool, that's how it is. And actually, that's not how it is. It's a lie, right? It's what it is. So I hope that's okay. I put that in. So there's our sunlight. And we can look at the T5, which is probably one of the ones that people mentioned quite a lot on the it provides UVA thing.
Yeah.
So there's your sunlight. That's a T5. That's actually an Arcadia T5. And if I put on those things from before, you can see that the UVB that it produces, the stuff right at the bottom, matches sunlight very closely. It's not perfect, but it's very, very close to sunlight, the UVB. The UVA2 that it provides is pretty good. It's not, it tapers off, whereas sunlight keeps going up, but it's pretty good.
And that's why it's so good for the vitamin D regulation.
Yes. So we kind of class that as our minimum standard for vitamin D because we know these are safe for vitamin D. So if somebody was to make a lamp, then they need to provide UVA2. We say it needs to be this level of UVA2 at least, compared to the UVB, obviously, because without that, we hypothesize there's the issues with hypervitamin D. The UVA1, the color, the reptile color, it is not there. And the visible light is there. And we know there's visible light because we can see it, right? You look at an Arcadia T5 and you can see it. It's glowing white, and that's what you can see. In fact, if I put on those colors, you can see.
Because it's exciting our cones.
It's exciting those cones, and it's exciting the cone pretty well. It's exciting the green cone pretty well, and the red cone is sort of excited a little bit. And if you look at them, it sort of has a blue color to it. We measure it in color temperature, and we say it's a cool white. And that's because it's actuating the blue cone more than the longer wave cones. So it has this sort of 5,000, 6,000 Kelvin color temperature. But if we add on the reptile cone or the UVA cone, you can see that actually it's not really, I mean, it's not great as a visible light for us. I see people using them on their animals and saying that it provides enough light and that it lights up the enclosure. It really doesn't. When you compare it to an actual light.
So really, its use is really good for the vitamin D regulation.
Absolutely, yeah.
That's where it stops, really.
The sole purpose of that lamp, in my opinion, is vitamin D. Right? It's a UVB lamp, is what it is. It's not a plant growth lamp. Technically, yes, it does provide visible light, and it will provide visible light to your enclosure. But it's not. That's not what it is. The UVB is bang on. Right, you ain't going to get better than that, really. But the visible light leaves something to be desired, including the UVA1, which is the reptile vision. You can see that it probably would appear somewhat white to a reptile, maybe, because they have that little peak around 400 nanometers, and there's one at around 360 as well. So it probably would appear somewhat white to a reptile, but it's not very bright. It's certainly not great. Which is interesting because we did get that answer a lot. People said, "Oh, the T5s produce UVA, so that's what I use as my UVA lamp." And I would argue that it's not a UVA lamp at all, and that putting on 30% UVA on the box or whatever percentage it is somewhat misleading, because what you end up with is people presuming that they're providing a full spectrum and they're not.
So it's kind of limping its way through the UVA spectrum.
Yeah, definitely.
Much. Right.
The all-in-one lamps, the mercury vapor bulbs, the D3 lamps, the combi bulbs, they're also called. I can't think of anything else they could be called. This is an Arcadia one again. I mean, they're an old technology. It's, the technology itself is decades old. The self-ballasted one, where it's just screwing on its own, 1995 maybe, I think it was. Zoomed made them. Arcadia have one. There's all the brands pretty much have them. They're not great. And you can see here, right? It's certainly not full spectrum. But if you look at the box or any advertising material for these bloody lamps, they say it provides UVA, UVB, visible light, infrared, full spectrum, like that advert I showed you earlier, the clip of earlier. They advertise that it's full spectrum, and it's really, really not. Technically, yes, it does provide UVB, UVA2, UVA1, and visible light and infrared, because it does. Technically, it does. But they're really not natural proportions. They're really not natural levels. And you can see, it again leaves something very much to be desired.
So where is the reptile cone in relation to that spike in UVA?
So those are visible cones, and now to us, they can appear white. They sometimes appear this weird green color, especially when you take it on a picture on a camera. You get this weird green color, and that's because we've got these crazy blue and green spikes. They're called the mercury emission lines. And the peak for UVA is there. Again, not great. I mean, they're not great lamps. They're certainly not full spectrum. Arcadia and some others now as well do add a slight what we call a phosphor coating to emit more UVB, and you can sort of see it here. There's a slight bit of a phosphor that kind of broadens out the UV area. They'll say, all the brands will say, that it's phosphor coated and provides a nice wide spectrum, but it really doesn't. It's really not. They're not. There's a reason I only think they should be used as a last resort. They can certainly form a part of a wider spectrum, I suppose. If you have this with a bunch of other lights, it would potentially work, but they're not great. Nobody likes looking at the green color you get when you take a picture of an animal with them. If a brand's keep bringing them out, and it's crazy, right?
They're the thing you have on the back shelf that if one day one of your lamps blows, you're like, oh shit, and you just slap that on for temporary.
Yeah, or a rescue centre gets a shipment of, somebody drops off 20 leopard geckos or 20 bearded dragons at the front door. What do? Oh, just stick my grey rules over them really quick, and that'll do. In my opinion, that's the best. That's the best use for them as an emergency backup lamp. At the time they were amazing. They were a sun and a bulb, but nowadays not great, especially when there's better things available, such as the T5s, which provide much better, UVB.
Yeah.
The big one for me, and I will get onto LEDs. I just want to touch on all the answers that people gave. The big one for me was the halogens or the UVA, because this is a big pet peeve of mine. If we look at a halogen lamp, this is the spectrum you would get out of it. Again, the spectrum has been well and truly upscaled. And again, there's your things. So there's no UVB, no UVA2. There's this smidge of UVA1. We get a little bit of visible light, which you can see because you see it glowing. And you get this whole bunch of infrared. And in fact, the reason we don't need to worry about the infrared on the spectrum with this is because these lamps are so good at providing it, like a halogen or an incandescent heat lamp, that you can sort of see the curve, and it goes off pretty much on the other side of the spectrum the same way. And it produces infrared A really well, it produces infrared B really well. Some of the brands say that these lamps don't produce infrared B, whereas actually it's 30 to 40% of the output of these lamps. It's quite a lot of the output is infrared B. So some of the websites have like infrared B, no, and that's just not true. They do produce infrared B.
So you've had to scale this up, right? So I'm assuming this is like at full output, 100 watts, right?
Yeah, and upscaled to 35,000 lux.
So when it's like upscaled and it's at full power, the UVA is like.
I put it into perspective. This is 35,000 lux. You're looking at about 1,000 lux out of these things. So it's upscaled about 35 times.
Okay, so when this is dimmed on a thermostat to like 50%, even then the UVA.
If you dim it, what you're also doing when you dim it to especially 50%. What you're also doing when you dim it is you're sort of shifting the spectrum slightly, because the temperature of the filament changes. You end up with a different output because it's a black body. Again, this is science that people don't really need to know, but as soon as you dim the lamp, you're completely cutting out the infrared, the UVA. Yeah, absolutely.
So it's really important that you pick a wattage, so it's like you're running it at close to full power as possible.
Absolutely, yeah. You want to run it as close to full power as possible. Yeah, you don't. Obviously, you can dim it for safety reasons, but you don't. You want to try and avoid dimming as much as possible, because as soon as you do that, what you do is you drop out all of the. I mean, the UVA is pretty much none anyway, right? But what you're also doing is you're dropping out the infrared A, which is the important bit. So yes, you're right. You want to run them as close to full power as possible at the wattage that is appropriate. So if it's don't take the numbers into perspective, but it's better to run a 50-watt lamp at 100% than it is to run a 100-watt lamp at 50%. If that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
I'd rather run a 50-watt lamp at 100%. But you can see here some examples of a whole bunch of different brands. And there's one thing in common with all of them, and that they all say UVA on them. Every single one of them, pretty much on the box, on the advertising material, says UVA. Now, if we go back and take a look, you can totally see that there's this color that we can see, but the UVA cone is just saying that that's a UVA lamp. In my opinion, is inappropriate. And I don't blame the consumers for saying it, and I don't blame the consumers for believing it. I blame the manufacturers for putting it on the box and saying it all the time. It's a real bugbear of mine that they say that. And again, I don't blame people when you see in the forums and they say things like, "Oh, I just stick a UVA lamp on it," and I think, you poor soul. It's unfortunate that these people have been incorrectly educated about this, and it's not their fault at all. It's the fault of, in my opinion, it's the fault of the manufacturers, and it's the fault of the hobby as a whole to presume that the manufacturer is
I
correct.
take it advertising standards has no problem with it because technically it's a
There is
tick and
UVA
it
in
is
there.
there.
There is UVA in there. Yeah, if you turn one on, you can measure UVA. Yeah. Yep, I know.
It's like getting fast food and being like, wow, it's got some of 5 a day in it. It's like,
well, yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. It's like eating an ice cream with strawberries in and saying it's one of your 5 a day. It's like,
yeah,
is it? It's annoying. It's one of those things. I don't think it's going to change because, again, as soon as one brand takes it off the box, people are not going to buy that one because, hang on, that one doesn't have UVA, this other one does. So they all need to do it, or we need to change the way we do things. We need to change the way we educate people. I think that's going to be a problem for a long time. The UVA on a halogen thing. By far the most numerous answer to the UVA question. Surprisingly, I thought it would be halogens, but by far the most. Yeah, by far the most numerous response was that LEDs provide UVA. More people said that than anything else, right? These are just a few. We have over 100 answers.
So strange.
A small, yeah. To my knowledge, it doesn't say it on the box. The only thing you think is that it says full spectrum on the box, so people presume that it produces everything. But yeah, the LED. Surprisingly, more people said LEDs than even halogens.
This perception was not even on my radar.
Yeah. Like I say, if you'd have said to me, what do people think? I'd have said T5s and T5s and halogens.
Yeah.
But numbers wise, a few people said T5, a few people said halogen, but most people who said yes to the question and then asked, how would you provide UVA? Most people said LED.
Wow.
Yeah, interesting. Again, the only thing I can presume is that it's because it says full spectrum on the box and people presume that full spectrum, that's what that means. And people see 6,500 and they think, they're told 6,500 is like the sun, and thus it must produce all the stuff that the sun produces. I don't quite know. Ironically, the sun is actually more like 5,600 than 6,500. Has somebody got the numbers wrong?
Do you think that happened one day where someone got the numbers wrong?
Yeah, someone just went with it. I don't know. It's very, very odd. Yeah, sunlight is more like 5,600. Like, the way you measure it is if you literally, it's a black body. So if you literally took a thermometer, if you took a thermometer, laser thermometer measured thing, that you pointed at, you went to the sun, got on a little spaceship and traveled to the sun and pointed at the surface, it would give you a reading of 5,600 Kelvin. There or thereabouts, which is about just under 5,400 Celsius. So it's certainly not 6,500 Kelvin. I don't quite know where that. Well, it's come from the fact that if we take into consideration the blue from the sky, then it's a little cooler white. But either way, LEDs are for some reason perceived as full spectrum and sun emitting. People get told it emits like the sun and it emits this sun-like spectrum. I do want to, again, another caveat, just define LED and what I mean. An LED is a light-emitting diode, which is a single component. So technically speaking, an LED is the individual piece, right? You can see them, sometimes they look like that. They've got this sort of, the SMD ones are like this. The way that works, if you take a cross from the side, it's a blue LED, a blue diode coated with a yellow-orange phosphor coating. You can see that on the picture. That yellow is that's what you're seeing on top. And then when you apply electricity to the diode itself glows blue, which then causes the phosphor to glow orange color, and then it emits light. And that's what you're seeing. You're seeing the blue and the phosphor emitting at the same time. And that's what an LED is. Now, an LED lamp, which is essentially a unit made up of LEDs. Now, most of the time we say LED and we mean LED lamp. And I do it all the time. I will say, this is an LED. I will say the Jungle Dawn is an LED. Actually, no, it's an LED lamp. An LED is the component. And I'd want to specify that because I'll mention in the next few slides. I'll try my best to say LED and mean the diode, and I'll try my best to say lamp to mean the lamp.
Yeah, because I do it as well. When I think about it, I describe LED as the concept, and then I'll
Yeah.
say like an LED diode. But what I'm actually saying there is like light emitting diode.
Yeah, an LED diode. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep, it's like a PDF file, isn't it? PDF file doesn't it? The F in PDF means file. Anyway, there's an LED. well, this is the Jungle Dawn LED bar. I do want to make it aware that I'm not picking on Arcadia here. It's just they have a wide product range. I have the lamps in the room, and I just tested them to get the spectra. So I'm not picking on it. What I'm not saying is that this LED from Arcadia is bad or this Mercury Red from Arcadia is bad. I'm just using the lamps as examples because they've got an entire range. Yeah, I don't want to. I'm not picking on one brand. What I'm doing is I'm using those as an example. I mean, you produce lots of lamps, you're going to get people testing them and looking at them, and that's part of the game, I think. So here's a white LED lamp, and you can see the blue LED, the blue diode is this peak in blue, and then you can see the phosphor coating produces this sort of glow over the top, and that's what you're seeing. You're seeing the blue diode or the blue LED with the phosphor coating over the top of it, and that's what produces this white color. A red LED, a red diode would look like this. If we had a red diode on its own, it would be this peak. And this is a problem with LEDs as a unit, as a diode, is that they are very narrow band. If I go back to the blue, you can see the blue is actually a peak. If we ignore the curve, the blue bit,
spike, yeah.
The red, if we take a red diode, it's a peak. And this is the problem with LEDs as a whole, is they don't have this broad, you need a phosphor coating for that. And the phosphor coatings are difficult to make. Or even invent, if you like. And we can pretty much, because of modern, what we call doping techniques, we can pretty much tune the LED to whatever spectrum we want, whatever beam we want it to be. Now, what we find is that as it gets to some wavelengths, it drops in its output, so it's not as efficient. It's not equally efficient across the board. Right. But we can pretty much tune a diode to almost any wavelength, which is really cool. The problem inherent with LEDs, with the diodes, is that they are narrow band. So if you wanted to produce a wide band, you would need multiple diodes of all different colors, and you end up with this little spiky thing. Not a bad thing, but you would need multiple diodes, which is why as soon as you start having an LED for this and an LED for this and an LED for this, you need multiple of those diodes, and you end up with a lamp that's this big because it's covered in diodes. We can go back to the white LED. This is the white LED, and again, this is the output from the lamp. But if you measure one of the diodes, it would be this. It's just this times 200 or whatever, however many there are. And again, I'll put those labels on so you can see there's no UVB, there's no UVA2, there's no UVA1. In fact, the visible light only really starts at around 415 nanometers. So it actually cuts off the start of visible light. Right. And then it goes off into the reds. So yeah, is it full spectrum? Well, I mean, it produces pretty much everything that's in visible light, but nothing else. So it's certainly not full spectrum or true full spectrum. It's full spectrum. Oh, that's my mister going off for the gecko. Can you hear that?
Can't hear it. Can't hear thing.
Sorry. Can you know? Oh, he's watching the presentation.
It's a good one.
He's killed. So does it produce full spectrum? No, it isn't a full spectrum lamp. And again, this isn't an attack on Arcadia. This is pretty much all LED lamps that have white LEDs in them will look something like this. Now, we do have more modern versions. The Arcadia ones use an old style phosphor. There are more modern versions that have a more refined phosphor, and I can show you those in a minute. But you can see the color cone. So you can see why we see it as white is we see the blue cone is activated very well, and the green and red cones are activated very well on top of that. So we get this really nice white color. And in fact, again, we see It's slightly blue in color. It's cool white because the blue is activated more. But our poor little reptile does not see it as white. And if you were to put a white LED lamp, a diode, over the top of a reptile and turn it on, it would see something that is akin to us not having our blue cone activated.
Right, so it would
they
look like really
see
weird.
a tinted color. They do not see white. In order for them to see white, they need all cones to be activated in proportion. And what they would see from an LED is not white. They would see a colored lamp. The irony being that people are arguing that colored lamps are bad, but then we all stick LEDs over animals, and LEDs to our reptile are colored. We don't know what color it is because we can't
see it, yeah.
But we know that there isn't the UVA in the lamp. So there is something missing from the spectrum. So they're definitely not seeing it as white. My hypothesis is that they're seeing it as some sort of orange. Because the red and green, the longer wave cones, are activated more than the UVA cone. But again, that's a complete guess. We don't really know what they see because we can't ask them. However, what we do know as a fact is that the UVA cone is not activated, especially in proportion to the rest.
And you would never even be able to figure out what they see, because even if they could speak, they described a color to you. You're like, okay, well, what does that mean?
What does that mean? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But we can say with certainty that the UVA cone is not activated by or not excited by a white LED or a white LED lamp, such as the Arcadia Jungle Dawn or any of them that are available on the market today.
So it only appears white to us because it excites all of our cones.
Correct.
But to a reptile, it's not exciting all of the cones, so therefore it looks like a tinted lamp.
It's a coloured lamp, yeah. It's a coloured lamp to them.
Wow.
Ironically, we're all saying coloured lamps are dangerous and they're going to kill your animal and damage their eyes. But yeah, we're all sticking coloured lamps over our reptiles all the time.
Have a bit of that TikTok.
Yeah. And what I'm not saying is people should stick coloured lamps over their animals, right? I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that the irony is there that we're arguing against coloured lamps, but then we're all using coloured lamps, hilariously. So yeah, the concept of LEDs, they're mainly sold as plant growth lamps, and as plant growth lamps, they work really well because plants use something like this to photosynthesize. So technically, they work perfectly as plant growth lamps. And I don't think any of the brands, to my knowledge, will tell you that this lamp is white to a reptile. They won't tell you that. But for whatever reason, people believe it because so many people answer the question UVA on LEDs. Yeah. So whether they've been told it or not, I can't see any evidence of Zoom-Ed or Arcadia or anyone saying, put this over your reptile, the reptile will be able to see white. Nobody said that, but it must have been heavily implied through marketing, through common talking to each other, because people presume it for whatever reason. It's interesting. So there's our white LED. Now, as I said, there are some LEDs that are more refined than that, because what you find with white LEDs is you get this big dip at about 480 nanometers, which ironically is the peak of sunlight. And you don't get any of this sort of UVA, and the red doesn't render very well. If we do a color check on an LED, they pretty much all fail on the red area. What a color rendering index does is it averages each section of the wavelengths, and R9 is the point. What we call it R9. It's red essentially. And every single LED that you see pretty much fails on R9. So you get what's called the color rendering index. It's out of 100. Most of these white LEDs will be about 80 to 85, maybe a little bit more out of 100. And the biggest thing that drops them off is the red. They don't render red very well.
So in this little valley,
yes.
Would it not make sense to have a secondary LED further up the spectrum and then
Yeah,
just
like
drive.
the one that's tuned for that wavelength. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Or refine the phosphor, which is what this brand have done. There's a prototype.
Okay.
So these guys have used, I'm not saying they've refined phosphor, they've used a factory that's had a refined phosphor. And there's even better ones than this. There's a company called Seoul Semiconductor in Korea. There's Nichia in Japan. They have some really good, well-refined phosphors that produce this. You know, we can compare them, right? It's a better phosphor in terms of its spectral output. However, what we find with them is they're not as bright. So you either need more of them or you need to drive them higher, which makes them fail sooner. So yes, the spectrum is better, but the phosphor isn't. The brightness isn't there. Again, I've upscaled this to 35,000 lux to make it equivalent.
So do you think that people would be more accepting of bulbs that would like die off faster if we knew it was better for our reptiles? The same way that we like know halogens are really good, but they can just die off.
Yeah, that's a good question. And it's a good comparison to halogens. I think the issue is that a good high quality Reptile branded LED lamp is 80 quid, $90.
That's the problem, isn't it?
A halogen is £5 to £12, $10, whatever. So that's something people take that into consideration and think, right, I can afford to replace that every month, 2 months, 3 months, whatever. An LED, if I had to replace an LED every 6-7 months because it failed because of overheating, I don't know if I'd be willing to pay £80 each time. Now there are other LEDs. I used these this brand called Sansi a lot. In fact, I use them in my house because they have this refined phosphor. It's not quite refined like this, but they have a more refined phosphor, and they're not as bright because of that. But the phosphor is better quality, so in my opinion, it's a better lamp. And they don't overdrive it. So what they do, well, no, they do overdrive it, but they have like a cooling mechanism in place. And they're also a lot cheaper. So it's like £30, £40. So it's a lot cheaper to replace if you need to. But yes, this is a refined one. It's still not great because it's still not got the UVA, right? You would need to add UVA diodes into this to make it work well. But you can see that this one has this extra blue diode here, which is interesting. But the primary blue diode is here, and then the phosphor coating goes off like that, which is standard and very good. Here's one from a company called LEDX. They made what's called the bird light. They use this in zoos. That looks like that. I think this was the 100 watt, maybe I think it's the 100 watt version I tested. And it works really well. They've added in the LED, the UVA diodes and violet diodes. You can see them here. So you can see there's one that's this strong, and then there's another one that's not very strong at all. And you can't,
they're giving it a go.
Yeah, you can't see it on the unit, but they've got this refined white phosphor as well. They've got this extra white phosphor, the same as the other one did. So the white is really nice. They've added the UVA LEDs, but what you can see is that as we've tweaked the diode to produce UVA, it's nowhere near as strong. So you either need to drive it higher or have more of them or whatever. My opinion on these is that there's just not quite enough of them. I think there's maybe 5 or 6 on each panel versus however many 40 plus white LEDs. So we need more of the UVA diodes to boost that UVA up. It's a good lamp. Again, it's a bird light because we know birds can see the UVA as well. So it's not just reptiles that can see that. We know birds can see it. So it's recommended in zoos that we use LEDs that produce UVA. This is probably the best on the market for that at the moment. It's okay. It's okay. And then this is the Vivtech First Call. So this is the UVB LED that people refer to in the answers. They gave the answer of we need a UVB LED. And in fact, that's what it looks like. You can see there's in the middle, this is the UVB diode. So this is what produces this peak here. We've got 2 white LEDs. These are the ones with those orange phosphor on them. We can see this. We can see the blue peak and the phosphor coating glow. And I've got these ones. These are the UVA diodes. It's got 2 of those, and it is way overpowered. So for whatever reason on this lamp, the UVA is super overpowered. Now, what I would do on this lamp is I would drag that right down. I would put in some sort of resistor to drive that lower. The issue with putting in a resistor is you introduce heat, which then makes the LED fail sooner. But when you see on the VivTech box that it produces UVA, this is what they mean. They've introduced the UVA diode, but it's way too powerful. So this lamp is tinted the other way. This lamp is tinted towards UVA, whatever color that is.
So if they just had the one UVA diode, would that not half?
It would half it, but I imagine half the output would maybe peak up here. Would still be very tinted.
Right. Okay.
Would still be very tinted. And as you glossing over a bunch of science and a bunch of math, as you drop the intensity, it appears to get thinner than the beam, the peak. Sorry. So where it looks like it's going from about 375 to about 425 on this, as soon as you dim that down, that drops dramatically, and it'll only really be producing around 390 to 400. I think this peaks at 397. This diode. So basically, yes, you could do that. You could take out one of the UVA LEDs and do a remeasure. What would be better would be to drive them less. You take one out and then drive the other one less. But on top of that, if I was to redesign this, I would I'd take out the UVB diode, because we know that's a problem. Because it's got, again, this is silly UVI, but we've got all of this in the UVB, but none of the good UVA. So when they say, yes, our lamp provides UVA, it provides this part of UVA, doesn't provide this part of UVA, which is the stuff we need. If I was to redesign it, I would take out the UVB diode. I'd maybe have a better phosphor coating on the LED, on the white LEDs, and then I would have different UVA1 LEDs, sort of maybe one peaking at 370, to kind of broaden that spectrum out a little bit more. Ironically, just to kind of put into perspective, VivTech's website advertises it and shows a picture that looks like this. They've actually labeled it wrong, which I think is indicative. VivTech are fine, they're really nice, but I think it's indicative of the level of understanding that we've got here. They've labeled the white LEDs as UVA, and they've labeled the plant growth 6500 Kelvin LEDs. Those are the UVA ones, but they've labeled that. I think that's, yeah, like I say, they're really nice. I don't have a problem with them. They obviously really care, and I think we need more people like them in the hobby. But I think this is indicative of the level of knowledge we've got from a manufacturing perspective. If this is the sort of level of knowledge manufacturers have, is it any wonder why we end up with all these issues? And the UVB part of it is a whole other issue, but I think it's the only way we can go in the future. Right now, it's not done well enough, but I think in the future it's going to have to be the only way, because we've got this fluorescent ban coming, right? Which I think I can talk about a little bit later, but you can see the colors there. The UVA is way overproduced.
But it's right on the cone though, so
it's pretty much bang on, yeah. But just being on the cone doesn't mean it's good. It's still better to have the full spectrum always. It's still better to always produce the full spectrum and not focus too much on where the peak is, because again, that peak is an archetypal reptile, right? That's not all reptiles. Some reptiles will be way over. It's about producing the full spectrum.
That makes a lot of sense.
Calling it full spectrum. Did they call it full spectrum in their thing? I can't remember. No, they call it 6,500 plant lights. They call it plant lights, which is quite nice because that's what it is. So I'll give them that. That's good. Metal halides are the last thing. Not many people in the answers mentioned metal halides. I think maybe one or two. And metal halides do produce a nice UVA, if you get the right one anyway. This is a Philips Mastercolor 70 watt, not the elite version. The UVA is, for me, that's bang on, because in proportion to the blue, it's about right, which is all in proportion. It's very much in proportion. They've got this weird green spike, but that's I think that's a sodium spike. The orange is almost certainly sodium. But the UVA is in proportion to the blue and the rest of the color. So that would appear probably pretty white to a reptile, or close to. And that's the reason I use halides a lot, is A, they produce a hell of a lot of light, They produce it for years. They don't die out after a year or two. They 5 years plus. And they produce this really nice UVA. The issue with them is they need the ballast, and there's a few other things you need to make sure that when you turn them on for the first time, don't keep turning it on and off. They're only designed to be turned on and off a few times, like per cycle, so twice a day, sort of thing, in the morning and the evening. You can't have them turning on and off throughout the day. There's many, many, many caveats with the metal halide, but they are a really good white light, a reptile white, if you like. Reptile white light. That's the only lamp I would use, and at this point in time that it's currently out, there are some in the pipe works that do produce nice amounts of UVA that are LEDs that I've tested as a prototype, and they're really good. But currently on the market, if you were to go to the shop or go on Amazon or eBay or wherever, this is the best you can get if you want to replicate white light for a reptile, in my opinion.
Do they utilize mercury?
Pardon?
Are they part of the band?
Yes, they use mercury, yes.
Oh.
Yeah. So the moral of that story is that LED lamps probably aren't white to your reptile, and they are colored lights. So the irony is that if you're saying colored lights are dangerous and bad, maybe don't say that as much, because you're using colored lights whether you like it or not. You probably don't realize it.
Wow. Drop the mic.
Yeah. Yes, the ban. They did the ban is on the restriction on hazardous substances, or RoHS. And if you buy a lamp, it probably has RoHS on it. At least if you buy it in the EU or in Europe, should I say. There was an open letter sent from a whole bunch of it. There's more than 50 different organizations, zoos, herpetological, herpetoculture organizations, fish groups, basically all the different groups, an open letter to the EU Commission or the European Commission asking for an exemption, because the current, and those are the ones, the current legislation that's coming into force 2025 does not give an exemption for reptile lighting or animal lighting as a whole. Doesn't even give an exemption for suntan beds. Those are the exact ones. Currently, there is no exemption, and that's the big worry that we've got, is that some of the brands will say things like, oh, it's fine, we've got special use, but we've not on these things. We have on halogens. So on halogens, in Europe and in the States, we have special use, although there is some gray area about the wattages. Technically speaking, the wattages, I think it's something weird like 75 watt or more is technically okay, unless it's so many lumens per watt. So there's like that's more about efficiency, whereas this is about mercury being in the bulbs. So the halogen thing is completely separate to this. The halogen thing is about energy efficiency, and we rely on a halogen's inefficiency to heat our animals. So we need them to be inefficient in terms of the amount of light they give out. For that purpose, we have special purpose privileges or an exemption to the rule, where we're allowed to use them for food and for animals. However, this, on the RoHS side of it, there is no exemption, because it's to do with mercury being in the bulbs, basically, or other chemicals. And all of your T5 lamps, they have a little drop of mercury in them. Pretty much all of them have mercury in them in some way or other. The halides all do, because the mercury is really important. The mercury emits UVB, 297 nanometers and 313-ish nanometers. Two real important points for vitamin D synthesis and regulation. And it's those that are needed for the vitamin D, and that's what's being currently the legislation in place does not give an exemption for that purpose.
You think we will get an exemption within the next 2 years?
Yeah, so the 2025 is the deadline, and it will also ban. I just want to say it will also ban the import. So it's not like they can be just made in China. They will ban the import of these products from other countries as well. I imagine there'll be grandfather rights for existing stock, but that'll be it. There'll be no more import. If it was to change, I think it would be a very last minute, as with many things that happens when it goes through legislation. Things that change are very last minute. Unless someone speaks up now, which is what the open letter is for, it'll be worrying to see. You'll notice brands on there, and you'll notice brands that aren't on there as well. It is worrying. Which is why we need the LEDs to get better soon for the UVB side anyway, because we'll be stuck. The two main European manufacturers of your T5 lamps are a company called Sylvania and a company called Narva. Both of them are based in Germany. Sylvania Sylvania's now closed. It closed in August this year. The factory is gone. Well, it's physically it's still there, but the factory is not functioning. Sylvania made the T5s for Arcadia and for Zoomed. They're the same batch, a lot of them. So they're the same bulb. They've now stopped being manufactured new. So any stock that exists is stock that exists, and there isn't going to be any more. Narva, which is the other brand, the other factory, sorry, make them for Reptile systems. They make the new Mega Ray T5s, which are available, and the Leap habitats in the States, and they're available in the UK as well, I think.
Yeah.
Those are all made by Narva. And the Narva factory is going to remain open until 2025-ish, probably or end of 2024, so just before the ban.
Right.
So those brands will still technically be able to sell new stock. The Arcadia and Zoomed ones can no longer be manufactured in the Sylvania factory because it's closed. So my understanding is that those companies have a lot of backlog stock that they've kind of bought ahead of time and they're storing, and they're going to sell off the stock. But they will not be able to manufacture them brand new anymore in the Sylvania factory. Now, they could still manufacture them in the Narva factory, but my opinion on that would be it would be immoral to sell the Narva bulbs in the same box with the same barcode as the Sylvania bulbs, because they are different. Although they do the same job, and they're very similar for all intents and purposes, they are different, and you can't just change the manufacturer. You can, but you shouldn't, in my opinion, be able to just change the manufacturer, change the factory, put the new stuff in there, and it's a completely different bulb. It doesn't emit, it emits a different colored light. The UVB is different. The UVI it gives off is different.
Yeah, because like when you look at retro systems, it looks really bluish
It's a
compared to
blue,
like
yes,
an Arcadia bulb.
and that's because the phosphor on the visible light is different.
So if I bought an Arcadia bulb and it came up bluish, I'd be like, hang on a minute, this ain't the same.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I would do in that instance is contact Arcadia. Same with Zoomed. If you bought a Zoomed bulb and it was different, contact them immediately and give them the batch number. The batch number is on the bulb, and you should always take a note of that. But it would be immoral for Zoomed or Arcadia, in my opinion, to just use Narva instead and stick those bulbs in the box and sell it as the same product, because it isn't the same product at the end of the day. They would have to launch a new line of T5 bulbs, or T5 tubes rather. In my opinion, anyway, I think legally they can do it, no problem. But in my opinion, they would have to launch a new line of T5 tubes. But my understanding is that they have plenty of stock for now. Don't know how true that is.
Right.
And my other understanding, and the understanding of these 50+ organizations, is that they are not exempt from the new rules. So they will no longer be able to buy or import T5s, even if they are made in China. Because currently, if you buy, a fluorescent, compact fluorescent lamp, so the Zoom Ed ones, the Arcadia ones, Reptiles, all of them, they're all made in China because they stopped making those in Germany a long time ago. The phosphor on some of them still is a German phosphor if you like. But the unit itself is made in China and they import them. But they, in theory, won't be able to do that from, is it February? I think the letter might say it on it somewhere. I think it's February 25, could be March 25. Which is a worry.
So because of Brexit, then technically, like Arcadia and Reptile Systems in the UK could move everything over to China and just import straight from China to the UK.
In theory, I'm not sure actually how much this applies to the UK post Brexit, because in theory we shouldn't be governed by this rule. I don't know the ins and outs. I'm not a lawyer. People should seek their own independent legal advice. But I don't think there's enough buyers in the UK to warrant a whole manufacturing process of T5 lamps for reptiles. I think that's crazy. The price would go way up, in my opinion. It's interesting, isn't it? I know some of the brands are adamant that they have exemptions, but the law is pretty clear that they don't, and these 50 plus organizations are in agreement that they don't have the exception. So you see some of the brands, saying it's going to be fine, but I think what they're doing is they're potentially referring to the halogen one, and the halogen one is fine. The halogen exception is fine. This is, at this moment in time, not at the time of recording. It could change today, could change tomorrow. But at the time of recording, we're in a bit of a pickle with them. Again, if people want to see the exact rules, there they are.
Do we have any confirmation that this open letter has been received, or?
It's an open letter, so it must have done because everyone else has received it. I imagine, like I say, what will probably happen is they'll change it last minute. But you can't bank on that, right? You can't just hold off until they do. We need to know yesterday. That's what's going to happen.
Yeah, it's a bit scary, isn't it?
It's really scary. Yeah, it's scary because it doesn't bode well because current UVB LEDs aren't great. They even aren't great. They're potentially dangerous for a whole host of biological reasons. And the worry is that the brands aren't fully aware of the rules, and this includes the smaller brands that just currently import from China straight away, don't go through any sort of broker or system, and they may not know, and they may fall foul of this. Because even post ban, if I was to call up a manufacturer in China and say send me some lamps, if I got the right one, they'd probably send me the lamps regardless. Yeah, it is interesting. I'm watching. What's the saying? I'm watching with keen eyes. That's not the word. What's the word?
I get what you mean, though. Yeah,
I'm watching. I'm worried a little bit. I'm not too worried because my recommendation right now is to buy up stock of T5s. The other issue, of course, is that we've all got the infrastructure for the T5. So we've all got our T5 ballasts, be it the Zoom Ed one or the Arcadia one or the Reptile Systems one or a Leap one or whatever. We've all got that in place, and all we do every year is replace our tubes. As soon as the T5 ban happens, presuming it happens, we'll have to buy new fixtures as well. And it becomes an expensive thing for a hobbyist. It becomes an expensive thing for a shop. And it also becomes strange because you end up with brands. There's loads of brands launching things within the next, we'll say within the next weeks to months, that are T5 related, and you think, why would you? I don't think they know something we don't, because, like I say, these 50 organizations have already approved that this is the case, right? That Mercury's being banned.
Yeah.
So I'm confused as to why a brand would put money into a line of fluorescent products, be it fixtures or bulbs, because the ban is coming. So it's almost like there's no point in doing it now at the moment. That you may as well put that money and effort into looking at other ways, such as trying to drive the price of UVB LEDs down.
It's a bit weird potatoes. Yeah.
I've
just realised I've just used a saying that doesn't make sense to you. Like, I'll just tell a story. So when my my mum was younger, right?
Go on.
They had like some teenagers start on them, right? So these teenagers were waiting outside, like, we're going to beat you up when you come out of the shop, and they were like with their friend, and they were like, what do we do? What do we do? And their friend, who was there with a shopping list, was just trying to like ignore that it was happening. It was like, where are the potatoes? Just like walking around the shop. So since then, like trying to ignore something's happening as like a saying in my family, it's been like, where's potatoes? So I just said that to you without forgetting that it was like a
okay,
thing.
Yeah. Okay, that's.
If you're making like T5 related things now, it's a bit like where's potatoes to me. Like,
yeah, where's potatoes? That's funny. It is, but it is very much like that. It feels like that. If a brand was to come out with a new line of anything fluorescent, I would be I would question why, because I don't think they know something we don't. And I would question A, their understanding of the legislation, B, their intent on what they're doing with this product that they know is going to be obsolete in a few years, or in a year and a bit, and C, what their intent is with trying to grab money from the system while they can. Because currently the T5s aren't banned, so we may as well get as much money, unless they know something we don't.
Is it possible they can make the T5s without using mercury, and it's some alternative?
No, I'll share my screen again with you.
Go for it.
Let me make sure I load up the right.
Just to be clear, when you said earlier about like buy up loads of stock, were you recommending the brands to do that or consumers to buy loads of T5s? Consumers.
Okay, yeah.
So buy your T5s.
Yeah, I would recommend consumers do that. Why did screen sharing stop again? That's weird.
Do you think it's going to be that serious that we need to like stockpile T5s just for a float until LEDs come out?
What I will say is, people who are in the same line of work as me, i.e., test lamps and work with animals and work with lights, we're all buying a lot of T5s. Put into that perspective, people in this line of work, including the zoos, are buying a lot of T5s because of the fear that it's just going to happen, and it's almost going to be, oh crap, it's too late, from the perspective of the
well, that's fucking terrifying.
The brands. Yeah, I mean, I've got a big order of them, and I know a lot of other people do as well. They're buying them on payday, just buying others of them. I'm not hopeful, put it that way. Personally, I would love for there to be an exception, because it means we can just carry on as normal. Part of me thinks, and this is, we talked about this earlier, part of me thinks if we need the legislation to make us move quicker, because LEDs need to happen, UVB LEDs need to happen, and maybe this will force our hand.
So if it comes really fast and the LED UVB diodes aren't there yet, then it's a case of like, we're just have to buy the UVB ones that are currently there. But well, we'll see.
Yes, we have to buy the best of the bad bunch, if you like. Yeah. And don't get me wrong, some of them may well be fine. The paper published, was it this month or last month? Was by Serena, Francis, and myself, and the kind of conclusion that we came to was that we need studies on them because without the animal studies, we don't know. We need animal studies on these lamps to prove their efficacy. But here's a mercury vapor bulb, and you can see there's a point here that it emits. Can you see that?
Yep.
And there's a point here that it emits, and there's a point here that it emits, and these spikes, these are called mercury emission lines or mercury emission points, and they are well defined. Like, you can Google mercury emission lines or mercury emission points, and you can find out the exact wavelengths. It's like 296.7 nanometers or something, 212.8 or something. Like, these are like really specific. And if you look at a T5, if it loads, you can see, if you zoom in lots, they have the same emission points. There's one down here, there's this one, there's this one, there's this one, those are the mercury. That's the mercury in the bulb that's doing that. And this phosphor coating, similar to the LED, where you have a blue LED that drives the phosphor, here we have this phosphor here is driven by these mercury points.
So it's like a diffuser over a light, like spreads it.
Yeah, well, the phosphor is literally diffusion, the white powder. If you don't do this, but if you smash open a mercury T5, rub your finger on the inside, you get like a white powder in your hands. That's a phosphor coating.
Right.
And what that does is it fluoresces, which is why it's called fluorescent lamp. The mercury, the light from the mercury hits the phosphor, and the phosphor then fluoresces a longer wavelength, right? So it has to fluorescence. The way fluorescence works is it has to be activated by a higher energy. So, for example, the LED, the phosphor. Where's my LED? The phosphor here is activated by this LED. So the shorter wavelength, these lower number wavelengths, activates the phosphor for a longer wavelength. Right. So your phosphor coating on your T5 that causes this nice, it causes all of these colors here, but this phosphor coating is activated by the mercury emission points that have shorter wavelengths or lower number wavelengths. So the mercury here drives a bit of this phosphor. This mercury drives a bit of driving the phosphor. This mercury emission point drives this phosphor here. There's the curves are all caused by this phosphor coating. And it's, in fact, in the Sylvania brand, it's this phosphor that is patented. That is why the Nava ones are different. Because all these curves and all these sort of different sort of nice color rendering, nice white color, is caused by the phosphor coating, and that is a patented blend of phosphors. And the well-refined phosphor is a mix of a BSP and an LAP. Is this nice curve here, and this is the blended we call it the triphosphor blend. So there's like 3 phosphors mixed into one, but they're always driven by a shorter emission. So the mercury is needed to drive this phosphor. You can't just make that phosphor glow with anything. You need that phosphor to glow with these mercury emission points that are shorter wavelength. Same way, you ever get glow in the dark things? That's fluorescent. Yeah. So it's like it gives off that green color.
Yeah.
And the green emission that it gives off is like around here and here sort of thing, and it's activated by light that hits it on the shorter wavelength. If you hit a glow in the dark green light with a red LED, it doesn't really glow that well because it's not activated by wavelengths that are longer than it. You have to hit it with light that is shorter wavelength. So a blue LED, or if you hit it with UV, it glows like crazy because it's absorbed a lot of energy from the UV because it's a shorter wavelength. Bit of science there for you. But yes, the mercury emission points are really important because those mercury emission points are, bang on this sort of vitamin D world.
There's nothing else you can use other than mercury.
Yeah, we can't do it without the mercury now. It's just so happens that mercury emits those wavelengths.
So any sort of like T5 technology now, like we need to be like just stockpiling this shitload of like.
Yeah, I mean, my official advice is if you if you've got one reptile, just buy for 2 years rather than 1 year next year, and then and then you'll have 2 years worth, and then hopefully by then we'll have some UV what I'm not saying is invest. Certainly don't invest in T5s like that. It's not a good part of your investment portfolio. But certainly what you should do is, oh my God, is it dark? Bloody hell. As if it's dark at 4:30. What you should do is think about the current legislation, keep an eye on the current legislation, and consider that T5s will not be here forever. And consider how many animals you have, how many lamps you currently have, and consider requesting formally via an email to the European Commission and also to the brands to invest more in UV technology.
Is it possible we can do like a mock one that everyone can just use and we can link it?
You can copy and paste the open letter.
I assume people could just like send the open letter to like.
You could send the open letter and say, "I agree with this. Please follow this." Yeah.
Okay, that's easier.
The open letter is available. It's on the website, or we've got it posted on the Reptile Lighting Facebook group, just as a PDF. You can download it and resend it to your representative. You can resend it to your MEP if you have an MEP if you're in Europe. We don't have those anymore in the UK because because of Brexit. But you could do all of these sorts of things. Yeah, you could essentially make a little petition out of it. But I don't know. Is it just going to
pissing into the wind?
Yeah. Is it just going to change anyway? And we need to rethink how we do it. You tell me.
But so yeah, I've got like what 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I mean, I'd need to buy like 12 lamps? Like, Jesus.
Just to cover you for 2 years, yeah.
Yeah.
And the last thing we need, the absolute last thing we need, is for any of the Zoomed or Arcadia batches to be bad.
What do you mean by that?
Well, if we tested a lamp tomorrow from Arcadia or Zoomed and we found that it emitted UVC or was a bad batch, the phosphor wasn't like evenly coated, or this is completely hypothetical. But if we found tomorrow that we tested a lamp and it was bad, we could then presume that every lamp in that same batch was bad. And we've not. If we then write to Zoomed or Arcadia and say, look, this batch is bad, they've then got to take that batch out of sale, but they can't replace it with any new batch. So we're wiping out thousands of lamps instantly.
So how does the phosphor play a role in like UVC and stuff?
Pardon?
How does phosphor play a role in like whether it emits UVC and goes bad?
Yeah, well, the mercury emits UVC.
Okay.
Mercury emits, again, these mercury emission lines that Mercury has. Let me find mine.
And it's the phosphor that's stopping it coming through.
Yeah, the phosphor in the glass as well. Yeah, so there's 254 nanometers is a mercury emission line, a really well-known one. It's actually 254 that the solar meter 8.0, the UVC solar meter, that's what that's attuned to. It's 254 nanometers because it's designed for mercury.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, the phosphor coating gets rid of that, and the borosilicate glass, I think, should get rid of some of it, but I don't think it gets rid of all of it because you can get UVC coming through those bulbs. Obviously not these specific ones, but if there was a crack in the phosphor coating or a gap in it, then you would get UVC shooting through. Yeah.
So if they fuck up the phosphor, essentially, for some manufacturing error, then there's
UVC. Yeah. Oh yeah. If there was an issue with there have been plenty of issues with phosphors from many of different brands. One's named here and one's not named here, in which there have been problems with phosphor coatings and UVC coming through them. Yeah, there have been. And what a brand should do is file an NCR or a non-compliance report, and they should also, in my opinion, they can take their own legal advice. They should do a recall of a batch. And they should also report it to in the UK, they should report it to the government as part of the recall service. So they're recalling a certain product. Again, companies can take their own legal advice on doing that. But my understanding of the law is that needs to be done. Is that they should at least file an NCR, and then at the very, and that can be internal if they need it. That's just for audit purposes. And then they file with the governing bodies involved, whoever that may be, the trading standards or whatever, and tell them that they're doing a recall, and then the trading standards then posts a thing saying doing recall. Something really fun you can do is go on the trading standards websites and look at recalls from companies, because you see all sorts of crap being recalled that people don't really know about, but it's like babies, like diapers, like nappies getting recalled constantly, because they've got like there was one had asbestos in the nappies.
Casual.
Which is just madness. But honestly, one of my favorite things to do is go on the trading standards recall website and just scroll like through this madness, like Pampers doing a recall of 3.5 million nappies because they've got asbestos in them, but nobody says anything. You don't see that in Tesco when you're walking around. Although I don't really look in the nappy aisle, to be fair. But which is another reason why the T5s and all the companies, in my opinion, should post the batch codes on the product, because then if you find a fault, you can report the batch code to the company, and then they can recall that entire batch. On a T5, it's usually written in like what we call dot matrix print. It's like little dots on the side. It's in all different colors sometimes, but it's not the branding. It's not the thing that says Zoom Edge replace once a year.
Yeah.
It's like sometimes on the other end of the tube, because with that information, the brand can then act. Without that information, they can't act on it. There's nothing they can do. But yeah, that's my thoughts on white LEDs and whether they are white or not. They're not. And my thoughts on UVA and whether we really are providing full spectrum, whether the brands should be saying the words full spectrum, whether they should be saying UVA, and also a little touch on the rules, the new rules.
Yeah, I'm kind of gobsmacked by that, because I knew it, but I didn't realize like how dire the situation was.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to, I don't want to scare anyone, but it is something I suffer from, if you like, is a how would you describe it? My perception of the world ending is
pessimistic.
My perception is that the world is always ending, whereas plenty of other people, including the legislators, all seem to think, meh, it'll be fine. And if I run around, I tend to, I'm fearful of sounding like the boy who's cried wolf. I'm fearful of saying, oh my God, this is all going to happen. And then it doesn't happen and nobody listens to me ever again. So, yeah, I'm worried, but I don't want to be super vocal about it, because I don't want to be that guy, but I do think it needs doing. I do think people need to scream and shout. Yeah.
Right.
If I wasn't holding myself back, I would be screaming and shouting right now. Right now.
So I need to get a bank loan to make sure I've got enough T5.
Yeah, remortgage the house, sell your kidney, all that sort of stuff. I hope that in the next year we will have some sort of movement on UVB LED that, from a manufacturing perspective, not consumer or the brands, but from a manufacturing perspective, that makes it much easier to produce that the good wavelengths, the vitamin D synthesis and regulation wavelengths.
The other question I had was, why is no one doing the bloods?
So in the UK, you need a DEFRA license, like a DEFRA approval, before you take bloods for anything like that. You could, in theory, do it with there's some labs in the Netherlands that would probably do it. It ain't cheap. You're talking 10,000-20,000 pounds maybe, which, for the record, I have said I will put the money in to fund, but nobody wants to take me up on it. I think the brands are scared, because the last brand that did anything like that was Zoom Ed. That was the Cusack study in 2017, Cusack et al. and that the conclusion wasn't conclusion, and we've all extrapolated from that UVB LEDs are dangerous. So the last thing a brand wants to do is put their lamp forward and say use ours, and then it's dangerous. So the brands are all scared.
But then how can you put it forward without knowing whether it's safe or dangerous in the first place?
Well,
yeah, I'm going to get you in trouble by asking these questions.
History repeats itself. If you look back to 2007 and the compact fluorescent scandal, all of the lamps were output without proper testing.
Well, maybe we should touch upon that actually, because a lot of people were like, "Oh, compacts will like destroy your like gecko's eyes, and they have no use ever and should never be used." And I think it's a bit more nuanced than that, isn't it?
There is loads of nuance to that. Compact fluorescent lamps in the sort of as an idea are perfectly fine, right? All they are is a T5 or a T8 shrunk down and made into a shape. Now, with that, there are manufacturing issues with that. So, what I know some of the factories do, which is hilarious, on the spiral shaped ones, is they will form the glass into the spiral and then put the phosphor in. And what you end up with is the phosphor not getting all the way around the spiral. Physically, imagine trying to coat the inside of a tube with powder, with talcum powder. You're going to miss bits. You're going to miss bits out. What they should do is have the glass tube as a straight, fill it with the phosphor, and then twist it into shape. And I know obviously there's loads of different manufacturing things that I'm glossing over here, but essentially that, and some factories do that. But most factories, especially on the spiral ones, most factories will make the spiral shape. They'll buy the spiral shape off the shelf, and then they'll put the phosphor in, and the phosphor, it doesn't evenly coat. So the spiral ones, that's what we do see that a lot with the spiral ones. However, the ones that are straight, we call it a 3U design because it's like 3-bar U shapes.
Yeah.
Those ones are a lot easier to get right, and a lot of the brands stick to those ones. They don't do the spiral ones. We call it coil UVB, and coil shape. But coil UVB is a bit of a misnomer because people will say coil UVB, but they also mean the 3U shape, which is the straight one. The real word is compact fluorescent lamp. And yes, I asked these questions in the same survey, the survey I mentioned. I've not got the answers in front of me, but most people say that coil UVB is bad, from what I remember, or compact fluorescent lamps are bad. Although inherently they're not, right? It's just a fluorescent bulb. The issue back in 2007, the issue wasn't necessarily that it was a compact lamp. It was the issue with the phosphor. The phosphor coating was bad, and the phosphor coating wasn't like it is now, where it's more refined and matches sunlight. It didn't match sunlight at all. It emitted UVB, and within those parameters, it emitted UVB technically, but it was all short wavelength UVB, or not all, but a lot of it was short wavelength UVB. Dangerous, caused eye problems, caused skin problems. And since then, they've had a bad rep because it's difficult for that to be rectified. Once you've ruined a product like that, it's really difficult to get back. But inherently they're fine. I've got some that are perfectly fine. I've seen some that aren't, but I've also seen T5s that aren't. Right, so it's not as if it's because it's a compact lamp that it's any more dangerous. I've got in my backlog of many things to do. I've got some testing for some compact lamps. They've all been tested. I just need to do the write-up. I've got all the data. If anybody wants a job, wants to write up a lot of data for me, send me an email. I've got so much stuff to write up. They're fine. They output fine. Like I said, they're not inherently dangerous. No. But they fall under the same ban. It's mercury inside, so they do fall under the same ban. So whether we should be investing in them is a different thing again.
Do you think, or do you worry about like LEDs suffering from the same syndrome? If we can't get it right at the start, and there is problems with hypervitaminosis, then people are going to be like, "Oh, LEDs going forward," or not, because it's the only thing we're going to have. So
yeah, and I think this, yes, the answer is yes, and I think it's multifaceted, because partly because of the definitions I gave earlier. So the LED being the diode and the LED lamp being the full lamp. People are told that UVB LEDs, are bad. But does that mean the diode is bad, or does that mean the lamp is bad? Because people are just saying UVB LED. And when I say UVB LED, 99% of the time, I should be saying UVB LED lamp. That's what I should be saying, but I don't. I'm actually talking about the lamp, not the diodes. And this is one of those, and this will become a problem. I can imagine people will say this UVB LEDs are bad, whereas inherently no, they're not. Again, inherently no, they're not. It's just these specific diodes are bad. The lamps are bad, but the diodes, if done right, can be fine. And it's like I say, it's multifaceted. This sort of issue that we end up with is a language issue, because we end up with people saying LED when they mean the diode, or LED when they mean the lamp. We will end up inevitably getting confused with people misconstruing UVA and UVB, because we already get that. I think we have a lot of problems to face as a hobby, and how we educate people, or as an organization, or as a group, or as a thing. How we educate people in doing these things is going to be difficult. I think that will be the next issue, because what we'll find is that UVB LEDs will become mainstream, but dangerous ones will occur, because they already are occurring, and there'll be no way of differentiating them.
do you think that also there is a responsibility of the brands as well to be working with people on how to educate, and not putting like misrepresentative things on their branding in the first place to cause the problem in the first place?
Yeah, I do. I think the brands are a big player, and probably arguably the biggest player, because they're the ones with money in it, and they're the ones who have all the control when it comes to that. Yes, I think I'm trying to think of how to word the answer. I change my mind every now and then on the tier system of who should educate, but I think number one should be brands sticking the right stuff on the box and selling the right information. Then the wholesalers, so your Monkfield, your Peregrine in the UK, those people and the sales reps for those teams should be focused on educating. Now, either they make an education branch and they do educational videos for the stalls, or so how they do it, I don't really know or care. Although I do care, because it's quite interesting. But I think they're the next step, because then after that, it's pet shops. And most people, whether we like it or not, most people buy their animals from pet shops, and they buy on the advice of the pet shop. And something again in my little survey is that we found that we know that people don't trust pet shops, or at least people in the lighting community don't trust pet shops. But we know that more people shop at pet shops and get the advice of the pet shops. So I think pet shops are really important, but pet shops aren't going to change their mind unless there are things like regulation in place to make sure they train their staff, which there already is in the UK. But I bet if you went into most pet shops in the UK and asked for the CPD record, they would ask, what does that mean? Despite the fact that the law being very clear they need one. But I think it's brands, wholesalers, and the kind of business B2B stuff. Then your pet shops are the next step. And from the consumer's perspective, they only see the pet shop, right? They don't see what the brand and the B2B stuff is. But because of the way knowledge trickles down, the stuff from the brand needs to be really high end. then the B2B stuff can be a little bit less, and then the shop stuff can be quite dumbed down, if you like, so that when the consumer gets it, the consumer's getting the right information at the appropriate level. What do you think about that? Who do you think should be in charge?
I think it's difficult because I always think of it as like this big pyramid, right? And if you're already in something like reptile lighting, you're already in like the very like top of the pyramid anyway in terms of like how educated you are and you're in the know. And most people that are just have like a bearded dragon as a pet, they're not even aware there's a reptile hobby or herpetological. They've just got a pet they bought from a pet shop that they wandered into this world.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, you got animals, cool. Oh, I can have it, cool. And then it's like that. So like the majority of this foundation of this big fat pyramid is like that. We're getting frustrated up in this tippy top, and we're like, why don't they get it? But we're not operating in the same sphere.
Yes, I agree. Yeah, I completely agree. Yeah, you've completely summarized my thoughts there. Yeah, if we want to educate those people, we need to step back and go, well, what do these people actually think?
Yeah, exactly. And we need to also recognize that there's a difference between hobbyist and pet keeper.
Yeah, well, there's another rant I made as to what is reptile keeping? Is it a hobby? Have you got a pet? Because they're my pets, right? As far as I'm concerned, they're my pets. The hobby is learning about them and getting their enclosures right and all that sort of stuff. But ultimately, they're my pets, right? I want to give them, I want to give them a cuddle. I want to give them a name, and I want to pet them, and I want to show them off to people and all that sort of stuff because they're my pets. But
Yeah.
I know some people in the hobby who would dismay at that, who would say, absolutely not. You don't name your animals. You name your cat and your dog because they're your pets, but you don't name your reptiles. That's your thing. And it's like, well, I don't understand how that. If that is the case, then get your lighting right and get your welfare right. Don't keep them in tubs because you can't have it as this scientific venture that there's something other than pets, but then keep them in a bloody plastic box like that.
I think that just kind of speaks volumes of their attitudes towards like these living creatures in general. But
yeah, there's that. There's obviously that. Yeah, that side of it. That is my my age-old quest is the sort of what is this that we're in, because I don't know any other hobby that is like this, that is so weird about this and so weird about how things should be done. And I think it's because it involves living creatures. I think there's no other hobby has activists that I'm aware of. Anyway, none that come to the top of my head that have crazy activists outside of any sort of get together. Screaming very inappropriate things. You don't get that. Another hobby that always comes to mind is like model trains.
Yeah.
I can imagine a model train convention is the most solemn place. And you could probably go there for free and it'd be like a spa day because you'd have all these nice old men talking very quietly. And it'd be like ASMR on a whole scale. And they'd all be talking about showing you the little things. There wouldn't be like people outside with like stands and A-frames and shouting inappropriate things to people.
Yeah, there's no one like with pitchforks outside Hobbycraft, is there?
Yeah, exactly. So it's like you don't get that. So what? There is something different about this whole thing. I mean, is it really that different to keeping cats and dogs and guinea pigs and rabbits? And I don't know. I mean, I think it is different, but I don't know what it classes itself as, because we end up with these scientific microcultures like the Reptile Lighting Facebook group, right? Which is like a niche, because the vast majority of people don't know that. The vast majority of reptile keepers don't go on that page and don't know it exists even.
Argue if you're even watching this video when it comes out, you're a part of that niche.
Right, yeah. A tiny amount of people who watch this video, who watch anything on YouTube other than look at my pet dragon while I put plastic wings on him. Or TikToks that are 30 seconds long and it's somebody showing off the new enclosure. It's, great or terrible, doesn't matter. The vast majority of people do not absorb that information, don't take in that information.
Yeah.
And we're an echo chamber, is what we are. I don't know. I don't. Which is why I think the brands are the only connecting force between me and mum and dad who are buying a little leopard gecko for their son. The brand is the only thing that joins us both together. That and the fact that we both own animals. Right? My obsession, I could say my understanding of the nature of these animals. I could make that argument, and my intent is different to those people. But the one thing we share in common is that we both buy the same bulbs off the shelf in the pet shop.
Yeah, it's
So
very strange, isn't it?
at that point is where the education needs to happen.
Almost as if like if you buy like one of the lamps, like in the box with the lamp, it's like a whole booklet that's like tells you everything.
Yeah, you know, a QR code on the box that, again, I put on QR on the thing. I said, do people think QR codes would be useful? People didn't really care. It blows my mind. I don't know what people want. Like it's one of the questions on the thing was words to the effect of, do you think QR codes would be helpful to add more information? And they said no. Now, weirdly, there is some legislation that on a product, especially in LED, they have to have a QR code now because they have to take you to its sort of its energy rating and the A,
Right.
B, C, D.
Efficiency and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, they have to put some QR codes on that. They have to have a QR code for the product kind of information page where it goes through all its compliance and things like that. They have to do that, which is fine. But in my opinion, they should have a QR code showing independent test results and information on the product and a video of how to use the product and a little of education. I don't know. Like I said, I think the fix is for the brands to have more of that in place, and them all to agree to have it all in place, and then the wholesalers to have more say, and the wholesalers to run an education facility for pet shops to learn more, because they all have an account with the same 3 or 4 wholesalers. Pedigree, Peregrine, Monkfield, like they all have this. Like all the pet shops will all have accounts with those 3 at least. Well, they should do. So if those 3 each had like a little CPD, a continuing professional development page on their website where staff could log in, make an account, and do training courses on different things, then that would train all of the pet shop staff in the UK, or it should do. You would expect it to.
Do you think that's just like an independent organisation that needs to exist for everything?
I think an independent organisation could do it. Certainly, an independent organisation could do it. So, like Tom's Reptile School or Tom's School, whatever. I could open up a thing and have a website, and people could do courses. But I think the best way of getting it to the pet shops would be to get the wholesalers to do it,
and so also for us as consumers to demand it of them as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, feel free if anyone listening to this wants to write to Pedigree, Monkfield, Peregrine, any of the wholesalers. Write to Trixie is another big one. Write to them and say, can you please educate your staff? Maybe don't say it like that, but say, can you please? Is there anything you can do to help educate pet shops more? But say it nicely. Don't say I said it. My God. But you know what I mean? It's like they're poised for it. My family business is in the financial world, and when it annoys me when you see pet shops saying that they don't want regulation, because if you want to see regulation, look at the financial world. It's like you can't say the word advice. You're not allowed to say the word advice. That's a word that is banned. Because as soon as you say the word advice, you're giving advice, and then you're regulated for giving advice. It's like a different level of regulation. And you need to be approved by the regulator before you're allowed to give advice. All this sort of crazy stuff. One of the big insurance companies in the UK is called Aviva. Most people have probably heard of them in the UK, Aviva. They have a CPD training. It's called the Aviva Development Zone. Anyone wants to look that up? And that is a training record for anyone who works in any insurance company, any of the other insurers, any of the other companies, anything like that can use the Aviva Development Zone to learn about the regulation and how to properly sell within regulation. And they can use that as a resource. And then when the regulator says, where is your training record? Where is your CPD? You just show them a screenshot of your Aviva development zone page, and it shows that you've done the training. If Monkfield, Peregrine, Pedigree did something like that, an equivalent, a development zone for pet shop staff, that would fulfill that niche. They could have a training record. They can have videos that members of staff watch. They fill out a little questionnaire at the end to answer the questions. They get a little certificate emailed to them. Jobs are good and you've done your training. And then in doing that, we're also training pet shops how to properly care for animals. I'm not saying they don't know how to care for animals, but we're training we're training them. Some of them horrendous, some of them are horrendous. But if we're focused on training people, then that's a way of doing it. Yeah. That's my opinion. Anyway, that's Tommy G's fix of the world, that training people. No, people could argue all day long that training people wouldn't work. Of course, you could argue that. But if that's the way they want to go with it, then that's an option. Whether an independent body would do it better, or whether one of the wholesalers would do it better, I don't know. I would argue that a wholesaler could probably implement it better, because the
infrastructure.
Pet shop already has accounts with these people.
Yeah.
So you could say, right, before you make your next purchase, you need to have 50% of your staff needs to have done this course, and you could enforce it.
Yeah. Well, I have no idea what to title this video. That's just
sorry, we've talked about quite a bit there, and we've probably talked for 8 hours, I think. So
yeah. Well, is there anything else we want to cover?
That much.
Is there anything else we want to cover before we wrap this up and get this out to the world?
No. Look forward to any new releases. Look forward to any new tests. Get in touch if you have any questions for me. You can. I'm sure Liam will put a thing somewhere.
I'll put your website
or Reptile Lighting. I do want to say, I get a lot of DMs. My message requests are through the roof. I don't respond to all of them, and then often when I do respond, it will be a copy and paste response.
Like an Instagram model
saying email me. Yeah. Basically it's a lot of the time, if somebody wants to ask me a question, the best thing to do is post it on Reptile Lighting and I might see it. The same for anybody involved in Reptile. I'm sure you're the same. You message requests all the time. It's like, make it a public question, and then more people can get involved. I'd love to spend all day talking to every single pet keeper about their tortoise. I get so many tortoise questions, and I'd love to talk about tortoises all day, but I just can't. And I'm not complaining, because I love this, but people say I just have one quick question, and it's never one quick question, right? They'll say this, and then they answer it. They'll give you the most vague questions. So you need to ask more things, especially with me, there's no such thing as one question and one answer.
Yeah.
So feel free to DM me, but I may not respond. So I'm sorry for anyone who's currently sat in my message requests with no response. I'm really sorry, but it takes me.
But that's also why videos like this are really important, because like this will help a lot of people with that's why I even started making videos, because I used to get a lot of DMs like that, and I started making videos to be like, there's the link that answers your question.
Watch this video. Yeah. Hopefully
these will help.
Hopefully, I mean, I don't know how long people are going to sit and watch through a 12-hour video of me and you talking, but I'd hope that people would at least watch this and maybe learn one thing. Again, it's one of those things. If you've got a burning question, probably email me rather than message me on Facebook if you could. But I'm not complaining. I think it's great that people are getting active and people are getting involved. So good.
All right. Thank you so much, Tom.
Thank you.